Life and Death of the Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy.
The morning sun was streaming through the crevices of the canvas when the man awoke. A warm glow pervaded the whole atmosphere of the marquee, and a single big blue fly buzzed musically round and round in it. Besides the buzz of the fly, there was not a sound. A confused picture of the events of the previous evening seemed to come back to him, and he thrust his hand into his breast pocket. A rustling revealed the sailor's banknotes thrust carelessly in. This second verification of his dim memories was enough. He knew now they were not dreams. He remained seated, looking on the ground for some time. "I must get out of this as soon as I can," he said deliberately at last, with the air of one who could not catch his thoughts without pronouncing them. "She's gone, to be sure she is. Gone with that sailor who bought her and little Elizabeth Jane. We walked here, and I had the firma tea and rum in it, and sold her. Now, what am I to do? Am I sober enough to walk, I wonder?" He stood up, found that he was in fairly good condition for progress, unencumbered. Then lifting the tent door, he emerged into the open air. He and his family had been weary when they arrived the night before, and they had observed but little of the place. When he reached a lane, a good mile from the scene of the previous evening, the man pitched his basket and leant upon a gate. A difficult problem or two occupied his mind. "Did I tell my name to anybody last night, or didn't I tell my name?" he said to himself, and at last concluded that he did not. His general demeanor was enough to show how he was surprised and nettled that his wife had taken him so literally, as much could be seen in his face, and in the way he nibbled a straw which he pulled from the hedge. He knew that she must have been somewhat excited to do this. Moreover, she must have believed that there was some sort of binding force in the transaction. On this latter point he felt almost certain, knowing her freedom from levity of character, and the extreme simplicity of her intellect. On a previous occasion when he had declared during a fuddle that he would dispose of her as he had done, she had replied that she would not hear him say that many times more before it happened, in the resigned tones of a fatalist. "Yet she knows I am not in my senses when I do that," he exclaimed. "Well, I must walk about till I find her. Seize her." When he was calmer, he turned to his original conviction that he must somehow find her and his little Elizabeth Jane, and put up with the shame as best he could. It was of his own making, and he ought to bear it. But first he resolved to register an oath, a greater oath than he had ever sworn before, and to do it properly he required a fit place and imagery, for there was something fetichistic in this man's beliefs. He shouldered his basket and moved on, casting his eyes inquisitively round upon the landscape as he walked, and at the distance of 3 or 4 miles perceived the roofs of a village and the tower of a church. He instantly made towards the latter object. Hence he reached the church without observation, and the door being only latched he entered. The hay trusser deposited his basket by the font, went up the nave till he reached the altar rails, and opening the gate entered the sacrarium, where he seemed to feel a sense of the strangeness for a moment. Then he knelt upon the footpace. Dropping his head upon the clamped book which lay on the communion table, he said aloud, "I, Michael Henchard, on this morning of the 16th of September, do take an oath before God here in this solemn place that I will avoid all strong liquors for the space of 21 years to come, being a year for every year that I have lived. And this I swear upon the book before me, and may I be struck dumb, blind, and helpless if I break this my oath." When he had said it and kissed the big book, the hay trusser arose, and seemed relieved at having made a start in a new direction. He went round to the door, and the housewife agreed to prepare him some breakfast for a trifling payment, which was done. Then he started on the search for his wife and child. The perplexing nature of the undertaking became apparent soon enough, though he examined and inquired, and walked hither and thither day after day. To add to the difficulty, he could gain no sound of the sailor's name. As money was short with him, he decided, after some hesitation, to spend the sailor's money in the prosecution of this search, but it was equally in vain. Michael Henchard from following up the investigation with the loud hue and cry such a pursuit demanded to render it effectual, and it was probably for this reason that he obtained no clue, though everything was done by him that did not involve an explanation of the circumstances under which he had lost her. Weeks counted up to months and still he searched on, maintaining himself by small jobs of work in the intervals. By this time he had arrived at a seaport, and there he derived intelligence that persons answering somewhat to his description had emigrated a little time before. Then he said he would search no longer, and that he would go and settle in the district which he had had for some time in his mind. Next day he started, journeying southwestward, and did not pause, except for night's lodgings, till he reached the town of Casterbridge, in a far distant part of Wessex.